Hello, welcome to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyun Park from Amalgam Insights, joined as always by Charlie Araujo of the DX Report DX Institute. Today, we've got a bunch of topics to talk about. Of course, there will be your fair share of AI, but there's plenty of other things happening in the IT world that are also important to the CIO and the ascendant CIO wannabes out there. So, Charlie, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, first of all, you're lying. It's all AI. Everything is AI these days. It's impossible not to talk about AI. I was having a conversation with a woman who specializes in working with product marketers and holding out how to best leverage AI. And she's asking me, what's my AI play? And it's like,
Mhm.
how do you avoid the conversation today? It's so integral to everything. It's pretty remarkable, really, if we think about it. In the context of a year ago, I mean, we've been talking about AI for a while, but it was always in these pretty narrow bands, and now it's just infused into everything. Ironically, though, I think the first topic is actually one that doesn't have much to do with AI. There's a little bit,
Mhm.
much to do with AI, and it's a topic that we covered a while ago. And I want, this is really a kind of in your sweet spot as far as being much more the real analyst than say I am. But that is the Broadcom. We were talking about Broadcom's acquisition of VMware a couple of weeks back, and about some of the pressure that it was creating as they were making these dramatic changes. And we sort of made the case. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I made the case sort of that this is, sort of the money grab of just taking an aging technology and sort of milking it. And some of the moves they were making seemed to solidify that. And so, somewhat shockingly, in my opinion, that the CEO of Broadcom actually wrote a blog post specifically addressing these issues. And I say shocking because that means these have risen to the point where this isn't just grumbling on the street. This is like, hey, I need to address this. And
Mhm.
I actually read both an article in our Technic and then his actual blog post. And what was interesting about it is I read the article first, and the article was sort of like reinforcing everything we talked about. I then read the full blog post, and it was a little less so. It wasn't quite the, because the article in our Technic was sort of like the impression that they sort of created was that Broadcom CEO just sort of said, you know what, this is it. This is what we're doing. This is what we came here to do. And who cares if you don't like it?
Mhm.
And the blog post was a little bit, a little bit more nuanced than that, and a little bit more balanced, and actually had some elements of trying to put forth a reasonable vision of what they were trying to do, at least in terms of the overall future strategy for VMware and where some of the other elements of Broadcom fit into it. And so I thought it was better than probably the press that it's getting,
Mhm.
but I don't know that it changes my underlying opinion of the raw mechanics of what's at play. But I'm curious your take.
Yeah, I agree that in that it has been a tumultuous couple of months if you're involved with VMware in any way at all. Seeing all of the channel accounts being moved back to direct management of VMware, and seeing how VMware is getting rid of the perpetual licenses and forcing people into a subscription accounts, similar to how Adobe did once upon a time, and seeing all the sticker shock associated with that has been quite a surprise to many VMware customers. I think even at the top levels, Broadcom is seeing that this is going to affect future revenues more than previously expected. I'm pretty sure that when Broadcom bought VMware, they just thought, we are buying this virtualization company, this core company in so many IT accounts, and we can pretty much do whatever we want because there is no way to escape VMware virtualization. And although that is to some extent true, I think Broadcom has pushed harder than people originally expected. I think people expected at least a little bit of leeway and a little bit of a honeymoon period where things would keep going as is for, call it, 6 months to a year before the screws really got turned. And no, we are just starting full out by removing the partners, going straight to subscription, jacking up the prices, and leaving some real questions as to what might happen in the future from an innovation perspective. So I think Broadcom is realized we can't just treat this as a cash cow. We still have to take the innovation seriously, because also if we don't take the innovation seriously, then CIOs just basically say there is no roadmap for moving forward over the next 3 to 5 years. We just need to jump ship as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the part that maybe they misjudge is that you are correct in the short term. You do not just rip this stuff out and go
Mm-hmm.
change, right? But over the longer haul, and we're in the state where we're refreshing things so constantly now that
Mm-hmm.
that longer haul isn't that long. That yeah, there are lots and lots of options, and I think it was evidenced a little bit. I mentioned that there's some that the that uh, sorry, the Haktan that put out this
Mm-hmm.
vision that I thought was a little bit, better than maybe some of the
Mm-hmm.
press. And what I appreciated was, I think, very accurately assessed. In this, it says he spoke to CIOs and CTOs and said that there are three themes emerging over their challenges, right? And the first
Mm-hmm.
is the complexity is slowing organizations down. In an era in which speed is critical to win. I'm literally quoting from this now. There's a need to simplify IT to support this increased business velocity and provide the flexibility needed to respond quickly to market changes, and resiliency and security are paramount. And I think that's all absolutely dead on, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
question is, and so they're making the case that what they call VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation, is the answer because it provides this foundation to, as they say, become your own cloud provider. And so it's very clear that, in my mind, that this is saying that, hey, they're getting that pushback. It's like, well, wait a minute, I can just, make this migration, and I need to modernize anyway. So why wouldn't I do that? And so to me, I think the big, looking at this, from an analysis standpoint, is this going to hold water? The big question is, do people want to be their own cloud provider? That's, I
Yeah.
think, going to be the big question mark around this. And there's so many different ways to skin this. And I'm a huge believer of cloud hybrid IT as the
Mm-hmm.
future. But this is quite a bet, I think, if they're trying to preserve the cash cow by saying, everyone wants to be their own cloud provider. I think that's going to be a really interesting question mark.
Yeah. So I don't think anybody doubts that there's always at least one workload that you want to keep private, at least because you don't want it shared with the outside world. You're keeping your 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 key secrets there. There's always some workload, some server that you want to keep private, but honestly, such a tiny fraction of your overall hybrid computing environment that it doesn't necessarily justify the, let's call it, the 5x price increases in VMware that some clients are seeing now. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. I know VMware has talked a strong game about wanting to continue Tanzu, their kind of application development and workload management and cloud FinOps set of capabilities that go beyond our virtualization and really to the management of hybrid cloud. They talk a strong game about wanting to continue progress there, but I think it's still very much a work in progress as to whether they're serious about that. Because when you talk about all of those capabilities to the CIO office, there are a lot of other players that they think about before they think of VMware, quite frankly, across all of those areas, even though VMware, so for instance, VMware technically has more cloud spend under management than any other cloud FinOps vendor. Yet VMware and Broadcom never talk about that because it's just not top of mind to them. It's just such afterthought to them. So you have to think, if you're the market leader and you don't even care about this part of the market enough to advertise it, like how much do you really care about doing this job?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting. I just think there's I mean, to a certain extent, this almost introduced more questions than answers for me. And the hard part is there's so many other things, as we were talking about, that are relevant, that this is the plumbing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's obviously critical, it's obviously important, but it is not the thing. I mean, it's only the thing people are talking about right now because of what Broadcom has done. Otherwise, it is not the core area of focus. And so that, I think, is going to be the headwind that they're running into. Speaking of which, I do want to
Mm-hmm.
shift gears because we managed to talk, I don't know what, 6 or 8 minutes without really digging into AI. But there was some big AI news.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we're gonna have a difference of opinion on this, but I'm always pretty bearish on some of the regulatory. But the EU passed a regulatory, the first, I guess, AI regulatory framework. It isn't, if I'm understanding this right, it's not actually going to become law for still some time. But anyway, put it out there, and it is now passed or approved. And I'm really curious your take on how important this really is, and what you think it means.
So, this the EU rule coming up here, I find it interesting in that I feel like the AI companies in general, whether it be Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Meta, etc., are all asking for guidance on what rules to follow. And so the European Union has at least come out with this Artificial Intelligence Act, which my understanding is kind of like a bill status. They still need to finish reading it, dot the I's, cross the T's, and then actually pass it, although there's a lot of momentum towards passing it. But in at least going through the language at a superficial level, I feel like they covered the basic ideas of um, respecting existing laws, reducing risk, looking at the quality of the data, being transparent, monitoring usage and access to the AI, requiring some sort of human oversight, and then being able to comply with both law and other compliance and governance issues associated with existing data transactions and IT management. So there's there's at least language in there that says you've got to do all these things. We are taking AI seriously, going from uh, data to model building to ongoing oversight. And of
Yeah, I
course,
think.
yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, I think where I struggle. I mean, I think we've talked about this, not this specific thing, but broadly.
Mhm.
I think we were talking about in the context of some of the U.S. stuff. Uh, I'm in favor of frameworks, and it's hard to argue with any of it. I mean, it's sort of mom and apple pie. It's basically, do no evil kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, where I get really concerned is either it's going to just be toothless, or perhaps even worse, it has teeth, and then you just have no idea where that's going to go, because so much of this is in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, one of the things they're talking about is it's requiring people in high risk systems like infrastructure and medical devices to assess and reduce risk. Well, what does that even mean, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's who's going to make that judgment as to whether or not that's been done sufficiently. And then they're banning things, um, like emotional recognition systems in schools and workplaces. Well, I mean, does that include intent recognition? I mean, there's all kinds of that's an extremely broad term
Right.
unless there's some other definition. And how could that then get applied, and it really end up stifling innovation? And they're talking about not
Mhm.
using biometrics in public spaces. And I get that on some level, and I guess it depends on what the definition of a public space is. But there are plenty of commercial use cases where I think I'm perfectly fine with, if I walk into a store and I have an account with the store and they can use biometrics, where I can just grab what I need and go, kind of a thing, right? Where there's going to be a lot of benefit to that. And so I look at all this, and I get it's wild, wild west. I get there's risks, but I'm always wary of regulators who almost never understand the technology, putting stuff in place that either stifles innovation or, even worse, just slows, muckies everything up.
Yeah, I feel like when I look at these rules right now, I feel like what they've actually done from an operational perspective going forward around maintaining logs, maintaining transparency, maintaining compliance with existing law, like all of that, I think is fine and good. I think part of the challenge here is they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle to some extent from a data perspective when you're talking about not being able to profile people based on predictive policy, or not being able to scrape images going forward, especially copyrighted or personally identifiable images. Well, that's great for going forward, but honestly, that's already been happening for decade, maybe longer. And I feel like a lot of that damage has already been done, or a lot of that activity has already been done. What you're basically doing is calling winners and losers, basically saying the winners are going to be those who got away with doing this before this law came into place, and then no new vendors can actually come into the AI space, which may actually end up meaning that you reify Meta and OpenAI as the kings and queens of AI, rather than let any new vendors in that might actually want to do a more ethical job because their product just ends up being worse in reality.
Well, and we haven't even talked about the fact that half of what they're defining in this you can do without AI, or I guess depending on what type of AI we're talking about. I mean,
Right.
there's so many variables, so many nuances. It just always makes me nervous. I guess you're getting my libertarian bent here on this stuff. But so I there's another impact. So we talked about that's one impact that we're seeing on AI, the kind of regulatory, and then there's the entire other end of the spectrum. You found an article, I think it was on CNBC, about tech layoffs, and it's not like they weren't completely placing the blame at AI, but if you read between the lines, clearly a lot of focus or shift around it. Probably the most shocking thing in this article, I think it was CNBC, from my standpoint, was that one of the people, because they like profiled a bunch of people that have been laid off or whatever. One of them was a data scientist. I mean, wasn't it just like a year and a half ago that we were saying data scientist was the job that you
Yes, the
needed?
sexiest job of the 21st century. Yeah.
And now here we are. So I was curious what your read on that article was, and why you picked it out, particularly from an enterprise perspective, what your read on it was.
Yeah. So I've got to be like, when I look at the world in general, I see we still have a lot of problems, and that technology can solve. I feel like platforms still have so far to go in general, even to make work more efficient and more effective, much less solve larger societal problems or cultural problems, even just stuff like a closed supply chain, and all sorts of different issues that exist. And looking at all the challenges that exist in the world and thinking that the answer is we are going to get rid of the developers and technicians and educators who are helping with this in our company, uh, to increase short-term profits seems very short-sighted to me. And I feel like that is happening across the board from a tech perspective. So I feel like what's happening now isn't really an AI issue. This is really more of a financial issue, going back to what I learned in my MBA days, around a very tightly managed company that improves the bottom line. Everybody wants to improve their bottom line right now, and I feel like this is going to be an era. This is going to be an era that defines like long-term winners versus long-term losers, and it feels to me to some extent like previous economic downturns and recessions. We're not in a recession, but we're doing the layoff aspect of the recession, where people who laid off too much, like back in 2008, 2009, never really recovered. And I'm
Well, I
worried we're
think
going in that direction.
yeah, I mean, I have a few different reads on this, I guess. The first is I think that to a certain extent, here's what I find interesting. Every single one of these companies that has gone through layoffs, they're also hiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they're these are not
Right.
contractions that are happening. And I think we saw through the pandemic, the tech industry, the high tech industry, right? Tech companies went through this explosive, and I would argue irresponsible hiring rampages, right? They were just hiring anybody they possibly could
Mm-hmm.
to try to meet up all this sort of demand that was spurred on by the pandemic. And I think, you know, obviously I'm sure there's a lot of variance and nuance in all of this, but I think to a certain extent what you're seeing is a realignment. Is they're realizing that they hired in some of the wrong places, they hired in areas or overhired in domains that they don't need. They've now underhired because then we came out of that and the AI storm hit and everyone's going, oh gosh, we need that. We need to reallocate. There is, there's been these recessionary pressures. So everyone's been under financial constraint. where it's
Mhm.
this move to, it's no longer growth that is the big driver, it's about profitability. And so, I mean, well, obviously growth is still important. You're sort of seeing all of that. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's the same message. I know I talked to my sons about this, that because two of them, two of my kids are in tech. It's a tech is
Mhm.
a tough space because at least if you're technically oriented, uh, really across the board, because it's changing so fast that you need to constantly have a your thumb on the pulse of where it's going and continually be updating your skill sets around where it's going. And I remember people used to ask me, it's like, why are you teaching everything you know? It's like because what I know is yesterday's news. What's what I'm
Yeah.
learning that you should be paying attention to, because that's where it's always going. And I think that there's a lot of people that got into tech in this explosive period and sort of missed that chapter, of an MBA class. It's saying, that it's about this continuous state of motion. I will say this, I think for the traditional enterprise, where they are mostly in a growth state now from a technology perspective,
Mhm.
there's some opportunities here to pick up some talent that has some of that tech company experience and bring them in house. The interesting thing about the article is that there's a lot of downward pressure on wage expectations. So I think this is an
Yes. Mhm.
opportunity for traditional enterprises to maybe pick up some short-term wins there. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I feel like there's a huge amount of opportunity there, but honestly, there will be some pay cuts involved. The likes of Meta and Google and Microsoft and Amazon were hoarding, probably 100,000 extra tech people that they may or may not have actually needed. But honestly, they were all world class technologists. They just need to go to the places that need technology. And honestly, a lot of those are going to pay half of what big tech paid. But to the average human, to the average worker, hearing somebody taking a paycheck from 400,000, cut from 400,000 to 200,000, isn't going to get that many tears. It is something that we're used to in the tech world, obviously. But I think for those who are able to take cuts, there's an opportunity to do a lot more, a lot of interesting work out there, whether it be in healthcare or with nonprofits or with other types of organizations that desperately need to improve their data strategy, their analytics, their AI, their networking, across the board. They need technical help.
Yeah, so I think that it's I think there's gonna definitely be some rude awakenings. I think there's gonna be some probably well needed realignment. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it represents, it's really hard. I hate to be super macro. I think in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't represent any major issue. I think this is just sort of a byproduct of what's gone on. Obviously, for the people impacted, it's a horrible thing, and it's a very difficult time. But there will definitely be some realignment. And what I will say, one other thing, little minor observation: um,
Mhm.
almost everyone they quoted in there is a remote worker. These people that
Mhm.
had these jobs and moved into these small towns someplace and are now having trouble. And I do think that speaks to this sort of ongoing realignment that we're seeing of back to the office. And I don't remember who it was, but I didn't share this one. Uh, but some one of the tech companies basically said, yes, you can continue to work remotely, but don't expect to be promoted, which I thought was really this
Mhm.
sort of interesting thing. So I think there's also that sort of underlying element of it. So we'll see. Talking about surprises, though, one that I am very interested to hear what you think. Uh, and that is, well, what I find anyway surprising, but maybe this is showing my anti-Oracle bias. But Oracle presented some super good numbers. Some that's the technical term, super good numbers. Very strong earnings and revenue growth, mostly on the on the back of their cloud infrastructure offerings, which I find shocking because they've been, mostly behind the ball. Oracle would always position themselves as being one of the top tier players, but for most of us, we looked at them and said they were sort of in the second tier of
Mhm.
cloud providers. And and I think it's just really interesting. Uh, so there was an article in Silicon Angle that quoted a bunch of analysts that we know, And talking about how they did a really good job of seeing the shift to Gen AI before others, and moving there. And I think it's all bearing out. So for me, anyway, a little surprising, and teaches me never count Larry Ellison and Oracle out. So I was just kind of curious about your read on all of that.
So I will say that Oracle has definitely has it had its share of swings and misses in the cloud over the past decade. When Amazon was first coming up, Larry Ellison was very famously ignoring them and saying that nothing was more powerful than the almighty Oracle database, and just going from there. And he missed the mark, obviously, but to his credit and to Oracle's credit, they figured out that they needed to get into cloud infrastructure, and they made some pretty smart moves in uh, improving their networking and colocation capabilities around the cloud to be able to support the niches of cloud that weren't being covered well by the likes of Amazon and Microsoft. And then to be able to both partner with Microsoft Azure where needed, and then to fill in, have their own platform and applications to be able to support a cloud offering. Right now, Microsoft is the only real, big three cloud that has its own real application suite, other than Oracle. So Oracle says, hey, there's definitely a space here for us to be able to come in and support all these apps as well, and to maybe not break into the big three, but at least fill in all the gaps that exist. And I think they've done a really good job of figuring out what that is, which is justified by the 50% growth. But I also think I would not be surprised to find out that there was some sort of a contract fudging going on here as well. Anytime you work with a large vendor, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, they tend to be able to shift certain line items and say, oh yeah, we can just call this spend Oracle Cloud, and then maybe you're getting your apps for free. Everything will even out, and then we can call this cloud revenue. I'd be really interested to dig into some of these contracts over the last year and see if any line items mysteriously shifted back and forth.
Yeah, we all have seen that kind of stuff, those kind of games be played, and they're fiercely Oracle's fiercely competitive and arguably even combative a little bit around all of it. And I don't
Yes.
think in truth, I think the growth is probably to a degree real. I don't think there's still a far also ran. I mean, clearly in talking. I mean, I am increasingly talking to executives that at least have Oracle on their short list now,
Yeah,
or are
they
moving
actually do
workloads
come
because
up. Yeah, they actually do
yeah,
come up now, whereas before Oracle was just claiming it, a couple years ago.
right. So they're clearly making headway. But what I think you nailed it as far as the difference of why I think they're finding newfound relevance. And that is the cloud is maturing where it's not just a cloud, right? It's about having all the pieces together. That application suite becomes a source of strength. I'm not 100% sold on their acquisition of Cerner and this whole idea of industry clouds. I'm not, but it doesn't. What is undeniable is
Mhm.
if you're a Cerner shop, you're on Oracle now, and that is now
Right.
going to prejudice you to say, well, that should be our starting point. And so I think when you look at them and Rebecca Wedeman mentioned the competition with ServiceNow and Salesforce,
Mhm.
and I think if you look at Oracle's competitive posture now sort of sitting in this space where they're on the one hand, you could say it's bad. They're competing on one hand with AWS and Google on one side, and then you have sort of Microsoft there, and then you have the ServiceNows and Salesforces of the world. But you could sort of argue that actually puts them in a better position, because going back to what we have talked about the last couple of weeks is that as a enterprise executive, you're trying to simplify. You're trying to, going back to
Mhm.
what the Broadcom CEO said, I think dead on. You're trying to simplify and figure out how to place bets that allows you to have fewer balls in the air. And so they can, because they can cover so much ground, and because they have managed to put themselves into a position of a little bit more relevance, I think that actually is going to work in their favor. I mean, I think Rebecca made a valid point of there's also this concern about having all of your eggs in one basket,
Mhm.
specifically if that basket has the name Oracle on it. But
Yeah.
I think that it's like I said, count me as chagrined here that I think that they have managed to put themselves in a much stronger position than I would have expected a couple of years back.
Yeah, and Rebecca, obviously, she's one of the best Oracle analysts on the planet. Like she's covered them so deeply over the years. So I take her both her concerns and her compliments. When they exist, of course, she's a hard-nosed analyst. I take them very seriously. But yeah, I think that Oracle's success to some extent comes here because the cloud, because they are hungry and they're still pricing extremely aggressively right now. It's kind of the kind of like the razors and blades model. Right now, they are selling the razors. They're happy to sell the razors below cost. They're happy to get the business because they're playing the longer game. And honestly, Oracle Cloud is in a growth cycle that we associated with the other cloud vendors a couple of years ago, back when everything was growing 50%. Well, now Oracle Cloud is growing 50% because they are in that combination of selling and growing mode, and they haven't gotten to their rightful share, as it were. They haven't gotten to their mature share of business yet in Oracle Cloud.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely interesting to see how that continues to play out. I will, my last little comment on the Oracle thing is I do think
Mhm.
that to a certain extent, the fact that for whatever reason behind the scenes they ended up there because it sort of ended up behind the eight ball, it triggered this fierce competitive nature that I think is just part of Oracle's culture. And that's probably been one of the better things for them, right? For a very long time, they sort of didn't have to care about anybody, and suddenly they were under threat from a lot of fronts. And I think that sort of reignited a lot of that sort of fire within
Yeah.
them. So that's probably been a good thing.
I think that's been happening a bit among some of the kind of original wave of big tech CEOs, like Larry Ellison sees this kind of maybe last moment to do his last big push. It's no longer good enough to skip Oracle Open World for the America's Cup and then just rake in the dollars anymore. You're seeing Mark Benioff at Salesforce taking the business seriously after honestly what kind of felt like a few years of him being able to look at philanthropic stuff and try to push something off to a co-CEO. You're seeing these moves across the board where kind of I feel like these CEOs in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they had their first big hit and now they are realizing, okay, this is the time to push the second hit. Same with Box, where Aaron Levy is definitely doing his next big push with intelligent automation. You're seeing all these people who are, wonder kids and superstars in their 20s and 30s, and now, this is a time for them to really push again because they know they've got to do that or be left behind. They were the ones who left people behind before, and now they know. So they know exactly what they're going up against and looking at. And so speaking of that, I think this evolution in the enterprise software space is leading also to evolution in related areas such as workflow management, intelligent automation, and we're seeing how AI is pushing into these intelligent automation spaces as well. And I know you have some thoughts here. There's been a lot of stories about this in recent days about how AI is affecting core AI, automation, process. And I'm curious what you've been seeing there and what is really getting your attention.
Well, there are actually three separate articles that on the surface you could easily gloss right over them and see them as not related, and I sort of lump them all together because they're all sort of attacking the same issue from
Mhm.
different perspectives. The most buzzworthy was a company called CognitionAI that has introduced what they're calling Devin, what they're claiming to be the first AI software engineer. And what's interesting. It harks back to what we talked about a few weeks back about this idea of the AI app layer, and because what it really is, it's, I mean, they haven't, at least I haven't seen any of the tech underneath the covers, but
Mhm.
what appears to me is that it's really about their orchestrating a bunch of different components and the different elements of using various forms of LLMs to put together effectively this idea of an entire workload where you tell it what to do and it
Mhm.
goes out and builds a plan, does the code, debugs it, does this, and I mean, all we have are videos, so you never know. And they're saying if you have a workload, send it to them, they'll do it. So it's like no one's really actually played with this that I'm aware of, but
Mhm.
nonetheless, the videos look super, super impressive. And one of the comments of a guy following LinkedIn said, "Is this the death of RPA?" And I found that very fascinating because there's another article about Automation Anywhere, how they just sort of blew the doors off their numbers and how
Mhm.
they're seeing Gen AI powered automation, and it's really shifting as they are now again notable. Not in their announcement of their press release, no mention of RPA anywhere, at least that I saw. It was all intelligent automation, right? This
Mhm.
idea of using AI to infuse into this to solve some of the traditional problems that RPA has always had about the fragility of it, and are they're doing that. And Automation Anywhere is attempting to do this on a couple of levels. They're using it to make the actual automation itself more intelligent, and they're also using it as a co-pilot to have automation engineers, people using Automation Anywhere to do the work better. And then the third announcement was a Series B founding by a company called Nanonets that is using AI to try to. I mean, honestly, I want to do a briefing with them because I can't really tell exactly what it is, but it was all basically about using automation and using AI rather to build this workflow automation sort of like on anything. It's like, that's the kind of the pitch. It's like unstructured data, structured data, pulled all together, use AI to do it. And what it really speaks to me is that we're seeing this renewed focus on the need for automation. When I talk to execs, automation is a top of mind issue across the board. We're not sort of breaking it down anymore into the different buckets. It's just automation. We need to figure out how to leverage technology to drive efficiency, to automate more and more of everything across the spectrum. And I think AI is going to play a critical role in all of that. And so, I think that bodes well for companies like ServiceNow that have been pivoting more and more to
Mhm.
this, AI fused automation and what have you. So it was just really interesting to see, all these different articles all sort of coming at it from different perspectives, really all speaking to the fact that, automation is going to be a major, major place to be playing in the next, 12 to 18 months.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've always been kind of suspicious of robotic process automation, not because I didn't think that it was useful, but because I thought it had kind of a limited time frame. The kind of activity needed to define each individual rule for robotic process automation is honestly extremely tedious. It reminds me a lot of, say, when you are looking through 1,000 different payments line by line to try to find some sort of anomaly when you're closing the books or something like that. It just feels like an activity that needs to be automated over time because human based rule definition or human based line by line auditing is just not a super useful activity. It's just that we didn't quite have the technology to make this work for a really long time. Like we knew conceptually that there was some way to do do it better with computers, but didn't quite get there. But from with Gen AI, the practical aspect of that is that we now have a kind of common sense that we can use to say we're trying to get this task done, and now we can define 10 or 15 or 20 rules at once that are associated with this task in a way that will actually be usable in the workplace. And I think that's going to be really useful for the automation anywheres and the service nows of the world that literally have millions and millions of rules under management and now have a decent idea of understanding when does this rule go with this rule. If we have these three rules, is there a fourth rule that we have forgotten about because we're human that the likes of AA obviously will already know. And I think that ability to do that will be super useful in a tech world.
Yeah, to me, I think
Mhm.
what's going to be fascinating like on the one hand, so I'm with you. It's always been the problem with
Mhm.
RPA is and any form of rule based or script based or just the fragility of the fact that we have so much complexity. And as again that
Mhm.
the Broadcom quote at the beginning, we talked about the challenges CIOs are facing dead on. Complexity is the enemy, right? We've got
Yeah.
to figure out ways
Mhm.
to deal with this and manage it more effectively. And so anytime you have this sort of rigid approach, it's always going to break, and you always it's like we've seen this movie over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Eventually it sounds great at the beginning, and as you continue to expand it, it becomes its own job just maintaining all the scripts, and it ends up breaking down because you're spending so much effort to try to build and maintain the automation that it's
Mhm.
exceeding the savings that you're getting from the automation. So this is where I think AI has a chance to really be a step change here. The question mark is going to be how much, at what point we hit that tipping point where people trust it enough.
Yeah.
Because the advantage with the scripting is I know exactly what it's going to do. I'm defining that business rule, and
Right.
I'm saying if this, then that. And with AI, particularly Gen AI, LLM based AI, we sort of don't know. I mean, on the one hand, it's super cool
Mhm.
and super impressive, and on the other hand, you go, well, I better hope it's going to do it. And so I think that those organizations that can get that right, and so that's why co-pilots are where everyone started, because
Mhm.
it's the co part, right? It's like
Right.
there's a human in the loop. When we start applying this to automation, and I think this is somewhat sort of what nanobots, and I don't want to put words in their mouth because, like I said, we
Mhm.
haven't been briefed by them, but um, I think that's where they're trying to go, and I think that's the right direction to go. But I think there's going to be a trust barrier that has to be overcome for us to realize some of that.
Yeah, and going back to the Devin dev, I find that interesting because the approach of using these starred and prize-winning developers to create code that is the starting point for the logic means that in theory you just have a lot of high-quality code that is being used to automate this that coding approach. Kind of reminds me of Data Robot back in the day and how they were getting all of these award-winning data scientists to create models and then use that as the basis for their auto ML, auto machine learning capabilities. And so you had these smart models, and basically their entire thing was we're going to figure out what is the optimal model for you to create for all these different types of use cases. And at the time, a decade ago, it was groundbreaking because nobody else could do that, and you would normally have to pay somebody $100,000 to do the work that they would be able to do for much less. And so I see that Devin opportunity as a good one, at least to be able to handle basic coding issues. Do I want it to build my 100,000 line custom app at this point? No. But if I want to add a little something and maybe don't have the time to hire a developer to do a quick augmentation or a quick fix or a quick audit or a quick check, I can see something like Devin being super helpful from a
Yeah,
code
it,
automation
it'll
perspective.
it'll be curious to see it in the wild and see how real it really is. But regardless of how real it really is, what I do think it speaks to is the future. And we talked an episode or two ago about AI, AI employees. This is
Right.
what it's going to look like,
Mhm.
and it's going to be some form of this. Whether this is ready for prime time or not, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. So this brings us up to the last uh, topic that we had scheduled for today. Thinking about how automation is going to help us. McKinsey came out with some new research on the future of contact centers and how we are going to change the way that we interact with call centers, contact centers, and the information that we're trying to get. And I'm curious on what you saw there that really got your attention on how all this is going to change.
So we'll have to see how real or how true this research ends up being in the end. But what is striking for me is that we just talked about Devin about this idea of replacing a software engineer with a piece of AI.
Mhm.
We've been talking about this in the contact center for close to a decade, right? With the first iteration of true conversational AI chatbots, of this
Yes.
idea that they could come in and act as a virtual agent And what is interesting about this article and research, it's a survey, right? They're talking to contact centers about what they're dealing with. And what's interesting right now is that the research seems to indicate that it's less about um, AI replacing agents and more about simply becoming one more channel in an omni-channel world
Mhm.
where customers expect all of it. They still need, in fact, I forgot the number was, but very few expected call volume to drop. In fact, they're saying
Mhm.
expecting call volume to go up, that the expectation or the demand or desire for human interaction is increasing. The customer experience is still critical, but now it's more balanced, right? So the research is saying, I forgot what the time frame was, 5 or 10 years ago, it was all about the experience, and things like revenue generation and technology transformation were sort of far secondary, and now they're all sort of balanced. Now basically, I think the big takeaway is it really is a sucky time to be a contact center leader, because it's like you have to try to do all of this. You have to try to figure out how to deliver this exceptional experience. You need to be transforming your technology, bringing AI into the loop, and having it actually work and not do crazy things. And at the same time, you also have to be worried about driving revenue. I mean, it's just like it's just upping the ante across the board and not necessarily driving, at least according to the survey, what we're talking about, where it's like this sort of fundamental shift in the nature of it. And I think that's just really fascinating, and probably, at least in the short term, a window into what we'll probably see happen across a bunch of different sectors, because I think that this is probably going to be a sign of the evolutionary process that organizations are going to go through.
Yes, we want tier one workers to do tier two and tier three work and to drive revenue. We want them to be more efficient. But at the same time, customers want more engagement, more actual human engagement at the end of the day. Um, you don't want a half-assed answer to come from a computer and then have that be the final say. That's just not a good customer experience, whether you're an external customer or an internal customer of a service. You want 100% completed answers and solved problems, which it typically requires some sort of agent or at least some sort of answer from a human being saying, yes, we have actually completed all the work associated with your problem. Because if you solve the problem and don't tell the customer, that's actually not a 100% accurate and solved problem either. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting challenges in the contact center. Right now, everything feels automated. Everything feels like you go through this 5 minute tree of logic that nobody actually wants to go through before getting to somebody who can actually help you. So being able to close or eliminate that tree and that automated logic with a more human or common sense logic is definitely welcome.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny. I was actually talking to somebody earlier today, and they brought to mind a keynote that I gave pre-pandemic, and it was called
Mhm.
the New Human Era, the New Human Age. And my basic premise was that as we are moving into this period in which AI, because even then we were talking about AI, but anything that we can reduce to an algorithm, we're going to automate. That it's actually these human characteristics, our ability to have empathy and to experience emotions and to share those emotions, that actually become the things that create value. And I think
Mhm.
so. It's why I've been focused on the importance of the customer experience, the digital experience, for so long. And I think this research sort of points to that really what we're talking about in the end, it's still about the experience. And I always use the term digital experience because it's all encompassing around this, that we as a consumer want that experience. And sometimes we do in fact want it automated. I would love, so I found a credit card on the street the other day and I called American Express. And while overall their IVR is actually pretty good, in
Mhm.
this case, this was like an outlier, right? I mean, I am a customer, but I wasn't calling about my account.
Right.
And so it's like I kept yelling at the IVR, agent, agent, agent. It's like,
Right.
get me to somebody because you can't solve this problem. It's like I want technology. If I could have handled this through a conversational chatbot that was smart enough to understand this, fabulous. I didn't need to talk to anybody. This wasn't about me having this experience. But there are other times when I need that, right? Probably the person who lost the card, they wanted that, right? They want that empathy. They would love that outreach for someone to contact them and go, hey, just want to let you know, you can rest assured your card's been found. We've eliminated any charges proactively, da 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 da. right? That the
Mhm.
experience is not one dimensional. Sometimes it's very human. Sometimes we can completely do it and deliver a better experience using technology. And I think the contact center is going to be ground zero. And if I was an enterprise leader today, not only am I putting a lot of focus there, I'm also looking for lessons, because I think the same things, the same issues that the contact center is facing today, we're going to be facing across every department within the enterprise in the next 10 years.
Mhm. Yes, and the ability to be able to parse whether a challenge or problem is a logical problem or an emotional problem, or some combination, is still honestly too difficult to handle through a pure tree of a pure logic tree. Hopefully, generative AI will actually help become a bridge, because it does have some ability to understand sentiment, or to be able to imitate or echo sentiment, however you want to say it. Obviously, it understands sentiment and emotion as part of, in a limited context, as part of what it does. So hopefully it can help bridge some of these gaps and get you to the right person, or the right resource faster.
As long as the EU regulatory framework doesn't ban our ability to do that.
Oh, right. Oops. Yeah, that would be an irony if the EU AI laws actually kept us from having better AI, better and
Exactly.
pure and more educated AI. But very possible, absolutely. Yeah. And with that, that's been This Week in Enterprise Tech. As always, thanks for joining. And if you're checking this out online, please like, subscribe, comment, and let us know what you thought and what else you want us to take on for next week. Thanks a lot, and take care.